Friends of NRA is your chance to support our Second Amendment rights and preserve America's hunting traditions. Join Friends of NRA at one of our 600 exciting events nationwide. From games to auctions and exclusive firearms, Friends of NRA events are your chance to support a cause you care about while having a great time with patriots in your community. Whether you're a seasoned shooter, an avid hunter or outdoorsman, or passionate about freedom, there's a place for you within Friends of NRA. Visit friendsofnra.org to find an event near you. Stand up for freedom with the Friends of NRA.
Shake, 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 Sinora, shake it all the time.
When you add a shake of Frank's Red Hot, you open a world of better. A world where wings bring out the flavor of game day any day. Where buffalo chicken dip takes any party up a notch. And where any slice of pizza instantly becomes the world's best slice of pizza. At least until the next slice. Bring every bite to life with the perfect blend of flavor and heat. Frank's Red Hot. I put that shit on everything.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast brought to you by Huntworth. Huntworth gear for all types of weather, all types of terrain, all types of budgets. It's clothing that just works. Check them out at huntworthgear.com. So this podcast is kind of like a long time in the making. I had reached out to David earlier to kind of recap his season. His Nebraska trip was really similar to my Kansas trip last year, and he had just an incredible season. And I wanted to talk about, for a guy who hasn't hunted a lot out of state, and to be able to find the success in different types of terrain, in different types of climate. I just wanted to discuss with him the differences between, what he does at home and what he was able to use out of state and how he had to change and pivot. And you'll hear in the episode how, some of the things that he had planned initially, just kind of went by the wayside. And it kind of goes along with what I've been saying for the last, I think all of last year, basically, which was trying to hunt out of state the way, or hunt in state the way that I hunt out of state, because the two things are very different. And we discussed that a little bit on this podcast as well. So this podcast, like I say, David Riley, host of the Method podcast, was on the Fall podcast. He's a frequent guest over there. One of the Latitude guys, incredible human being. Really, you guys are going to enjoy this episode. We're going to be doing I got to figure out what's going on for the year. We've got some pretty cool things in the works, got some other things that we're trying to put together. So sit tight on that for our Patreons. Definitely kind of slowing down in the Marco Polos because we're in the off season, but looking forward to getting some of the stuff back up and running. Now we're starting to look to tack, getting all of that coordinated. We're going to be doing the Boyne Total Archery Challenge. I'm probably going to run up to Crystal one of the days, but Boyne is going to be where you can find us there. Hope to shoot with as many of the Patreons as we can. We usually have a pretty good turnout there. And if you're interested in supporting the show, helping us do some of that stuff, patreon.com/Bowhunter Chronicles podcast as well. I'm also going to be at the NRA show in Harrisburg again this year. I'm going to be there for that final weekend. So if you're there, stop by the Latitude booth and check it out. John can't go. He's getting ready to go to the Keys as he normally does. So look forward to seeing as many of you as I can. And as always, thanks for listening. All right, everybody, Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, talking with host of the Method podcast, DJ Riley. And if you've been following along with that at all, you know that he had just an incredible season. But I feel like, we all think of David as a killer, and it's not that he can't do it. He's, he puts in all the work, all this stuff, but he kind of did it in a different way, killing 4 bucks, going out of state this year. which is somewhat new to him. So I want to kind of talk through like some of those things and kind of like what he experienced on those and kind of what can help other people be successful in that same, journey. So, how you doing today, David?
Man, well, first off, Adam, thanks for having me back on the show. I was actually thinking about this, that the last time we did this, we were probably in shorts and t-shirts, and I actually think we were joking around about how good the grass, the lines looked in the lawn. And now today it's cold, and it's going to be getting even colder in Michigan, So it's the one thing that was, really standing out in my mind was like time goes by so fast, right? Like we always feel like a hunting season goes by so fast, but I think the last time we did this was probably legitimately a half a year ago, but here we are today. But dude, I'm doing good. Family's good. Hunting season was great. Just got back from vacation, so all is good on my end. How about you, buddy? How are you doing?
Good. I'm, working through some fitness stuff and, getting back, kind of try to get in shape, for the summer and putting that. And, so I walk my dog outside today at 15 degrees, come in with the snow, ice in my beard, like all that sort of stuff. I'm the idiot out there walking around, but yeah, everything's going good. We got John, we're doing this in midday, but John's back on the podcast. He finished his house and just got back from ATA. So things are going good, man.
Good. How was ATA for you?
It was like a double-edged sword, right? It was a very small show. We got to see, some of our friends, a lot of the guys that we normally see weren't there. But being a small show, like you kind of got to like really kind of like develop new relationships and kind of like you had time for everybody. And if you had a product that you wanted, like, so we sat at the Prime booth and talked with BA and then Sunday talked to Mitch for a long time about, just the new bow and all that stuff where, on a really busy time, like maybe you don't have that time to sit and talk with them. Like, the guys over at Big Shot are really great to us. We got to sit there and spend a bunch of time with them. And then, we got to meet people, different dealers and, friends of friends, and then spend some time with them, have dinner, all that stuff. So it was cool. And it really solidifies like really how small the industry is. I mean, we met a guy that's good friends with the guys from the Habitat podcast, and he was talking about his properties in Illinois and Kansas and Iowa. And I killed my buck in Kansas 18 miles from his property. Like I actually drove past it while I was scouting out there. So you want to talk about a small world, so it was really cool from that aspect to really have the time to kind of, talk with people and, kind of like build those relationships and stuff like that. So, but as far as a product side, it's hard when all the, a lot of the major bow manufacturers out there aren't there. I mean, heck, even Trophy Line wasn't there. I mean, Badlands wasn't there, so there was no film festival. Like it was just a whole nother, it was a different feel to it. But it wasn't all bad. It was just, different in that degree.
Well, I mean that's that's a great way to take the flip side of not having a really giant show, because that's all you see nowadays is how the ATA is it's dying down. It's dying down where it's like, well, there was still a way that you were able to capitalize on a good ATA, where it's like, it's almost like the same concept you try to explain to kids, where say you got a classroom of 40 kids or all of a sudden, you got a classroom of 6 kids where it's like you get so much more one-on-one time with that teacher where like maybe there's actually more value in that. So that's cool that, you got the flip side of what maybe a quote unquote dying ATA show is. But, I'll never forget the first time I ever went to ATA. Someone said this to me and I can't remember who, but they said, isn't it wild that basically almost probably 98 to 99% of the archery world is under one roof. So it's really not that big, you know what I mean? Like you said, and how you're talking about that guy you got talking to only lived 18 miles from where you killed your buck in Kansas. the one thing about hunting, man, it's like the more people you talk to out there, it's like the smaller the world actually is. You find out like this guy knows this guy, or this guy's hunting near this piece of property or this piece of public, where it's truly wild how small it is.
Yeah, and so from that like Kansas thing, the last time that we talked, I didn't realize, for you to have, an amazing wall, kill all these deer, and to say that you don't really go out of state, because of your kids, and now
Hmm.
they're older and you have a few more opportunities to do this. Last year was your first out of state hunt. You went to Kansas, and then this year you planned a hunt, and then you went ahead and just did a drop-in hunt, and that turned out to be, pretty wild. So for you as a guy, like, I feel like almost those three hunts are quite different in like even the approach to them.
Hmm.
And you're a guy who puts in, all the hours behind the glass at home. All these swamps intimately. You're chasing these deer year over year and keeping tabs on them and all this stuff. And one of the things that I enjoy about, you could say that it's an excuse for me to be lazy, but I enjoy being surprised by what comes up. And I could tell from some of these stories, from your hunts this year, that was something that was somewhat novel to you, but still equally cool, So for you, out of state hunts, like your Kansas hunt, your Nebraska hunt, and your Illinois hunt, they were all very different, kind of in terms of the way they set up. So I want to talk about your Nebraska hunt first, just because it kind of lined up with what happened with my hunt in Kansas, which was I drew on accident. So I went out there by myself, and I found some people that I had met through social media that had an Airbnb that were going to be there the same day. And I went out there and we stayed in the same place, and, they helped me drag my buck out. And it was, now you have this bond, this relationship that, you'll never forget. So talk about that Nebraska trip and like mentally going into it from a David Riley's perspective of the guy that puts in all the seat time, all the glass time and everything to go out to like somewhere completely foreign kind of by yourself.
Yeah. Well, first off, geez, your story wildly sounds a lot like my Nebraska story, like crazy, crazy. But to backtrack a little bit, so, to kind of give everyone a little bit about maybe where my headspace comes with, these kind of newer out of state hunts. Before I ever went to Nebraska or Kansas in 2023, and then Nebraska and Illinois in 2024, I actually went out to travel out of state once, and I went to the great state of Iowa back in 2020. And that year, out of the last 12 years of hunting, kind of my chapter of like trying to chase bigger deer, 2020, the year I went to Iowa, is actually the only year I haven't killed a deer. But I want to say this: I was so content coming home from Iowa that year, not killing. And I went out there twice, and I had missed the biggest deer of my life, and it's still the biggest deer of my life today. Missed them, went back out there for another trip, and came home fully content. Like my heart was full. And the only thing I was really, really bummed about is that how long it was going to take to draw again. But you know what? There was a big lesson to be learned there along that way. And it was okay. It was okay not to possibly fill a tag. And so like, when I think back at like the beginning stages of me planning to go out to Nebraska, like going out of state, like I am not afraid to try things. I don't like failing, but I'm not afraid to fail. So, there when I first started thinking about like traveling out there, it was originally planned that I was going to go with some of the Latitude guys that they've been out to Nebraska a few times. And as summer was kind of getting to an end, I know a wedding or two popped up for them in, that real popular time to have a wedding in September. two of them got called in for weddings, and so they kind of got their week got pushed back. Well, mine couldn't get pushed back because I actually had a wedding on the tail end of that. My brother was getting married, and so that's why, I already drew the tag, because that part of Nebraska you got to draw the tag now. So I'd already drew the tag. I had it, and my wife and I were talking, and I was like, I think I'm still going to go. And she's like, really? And I said, yeah, I think so. And I got talking to, Matt Lear and Brett Postal. And there's another guy went out there, and they were going to be in Nebraska. And I just simply reached out, like a friend of friend that says, hey, you don't have to tell me exactly where you guys are going to be in Nebraska, but like what, general region of the state are you going to be in? Because if you're somewhat close to even where I was thinking about going, I'll pitch in on the Airbnb. I just need a place to take a shower and sleep. I really, I could have stayed in the truck, but having a shower at the end of August and beginning of September was going to be pretty nice out there with the temperatures. And there's three guys basically. They were already all committed to go, and they talked it over and seeing if they want to split it, a fourth way. And they all said they were cool with it. And so I said, yeah, I'll jump at the opportunity. But even at that opportunity, staying with them, it still meant like I still kind of, I was doing some e-scouting. And with the e-scouting, I figured out from where they finally, they shared where they were staying. It was still like, 90 to 100 minutes away from the house from where I wanted to hunt. But I thought, well, that was always the original plan. You might as well stick to it. And so I knew I was going to be putting a bunch of miles on. But, I look back at some of the e-scouting I was doing, late summer leading into the trip, is I didn't want to, boil the ocean too much. I know in the past I've been extremely guilty of trying to e-scout a new property. And next thing you know, I show up to that new property and I have 30 pins sitting on it. And it's just like, it's just too much, right? Well, for Nebraska, all I simply wanted to do was drop, I wanted 3 properties. That's what I wanted. I wanted 3 properties, all within, say, less than an hour of each other. So if one was a bust, I could bounce to the other, or I could bounce, to option A, B, or C at any given time. And even on those properties, I would study them, but I wasn't just dropping a bunch of pins on them. I was just dropping pins on the places I wanted to check out, because my plan was, so this year in Nebraska, September 1 was the opener, which was on a Sunday. So I left out on Friday morning. I left out real early Friday morning. It was like a 12 or 13-hour drive for me to get out there. But if I left early enough, I knew I could get in, at least a quarter of a day of scouting, and then possibly get in some glassing. And once I got out there, instantly in my mind, as I thought, man, I'm gonna glass one up. This is gonna, like, I'm not saying that part of the season, it's not rocket science, right? It's early season. I expect to see them through the glass. I expect to watch them, go back to bed in the morning, and then we're gonna hunt them. And I thought that's what I was gonna do for 2 days out there. Well, I'm glad I did the scouting, because I tell you what, Adam, as much as all the years I've ever been sitting behind a spotting scope, I've never got my ass kicked more looking for some velvet bucks than I did out in Nebraska. Like I couldn't find a deer, could not find a deer. And it was like, when I was doing my scouting, the tracks were there, the crossings were there. I could see the feeding, on the edge of some bean fields, but I just could not find any deer. And the ones I did see were like in the headlights, and they're crossing the road, which out in Nebraska, if they're crossing the road, they're a long ways away from cover, like a long ways away from cover. So I just continued, that first day I got this scouted. I felt pretty good about my scouting. Like the very first spot I kind of picked on the map to scout, I felt pretty good with. Then the second time, or that evening when I went out glassing, didn't see anything. Got up the next morning to glass, didn't see anything. So then I scouted all day, and that was Saturday. I was all day scouting Saturday, knowing that the opener was the next day. Then I glassed all night Saturday night, didn't see a thing. But during the day, on Saturday, my scouting, I had kicked up a buck, and I never seen the buck, but from the tracks, because I followed him. That's probably the coolest part I'll always remember about my Nebraska hunt, other than meeting the people, and we'll get into all that. But like that buck I had jumped that day, what led me to even scouting that piece was I cut his track crossing the road. And a lot of times at that time of year, if you watch any like YouTube content about Nebraska early season, a lot of it's always about, well, it's so dry, it's so dry. Well, 48 hours before I arrived in Nebraska, this past year, they had got a downpour. I mean, just a downpour. And it took every dirt road and was like a blank canvas. So I knew, like, the day I arrived, I could tell how old those tracks are. Then I would go check the same roads the following day. So now I knew, like, if I cut a new track, that wasn't from the day I arrived. That happened overnight. And that buck gave up his location by crossing that road during the night. But doing that, I had learned that I was finding a lot of deer in and around the cornfields out there, even though it was, we're talking very last day of August going into very opening day, September 1. And once I backtracked that buck, he crossed the road, crossed this ditch, and he walked down one corn edge, hit to another cornfield, walked down that cornfield edge, and then jumped down, not jump, but he kind of dropped off on this point. And I bumped him out of there, and I said, "Oh, okay." And once I bumped him, I thought, well, you might as well go ahead and walk this entire cornfield. And when I did that, I was bumping deer left and right. And I said, okay, like this is where the deer are at, and maybe that's why I wasn't seeing them behind the glass in the beans. Like, I could tell there's browsing pressure on the beans, that they were touching the beans, but maybe it was just after dark. Maybe they were sticking to the so much cover. Then once the darkness fell, they were making their way to the beans. Well, I got done with scouting that day, and I felt really confident because of this. I had one spot that I had found, and it was the very first spot I had found on the map, and it made all the sense in the world. But once I got in there and could see it with my own eyes, it made even more sense to me. I could see the edge of a cornfield. That the edge of the cornfield was like 90 yards away, and the edge of this bean field was like 30 yards away. But it allowed me to see both. And in all honesty, Adam, when I went hunted that spot opening night, I thought, dude, this spot during the rut would be phenomenal. But it was also the kind of spot when I sat in it, it was like I had planned to be there for 5 days. I legit thought about, maybe sitting here the entire time, but because it looked right to me. It truly looked right to me. Well, I don't know, hour, 2 hours go by that evening, and I look out the beans, and here stands up this buck, right? And so I'm focused kind of on this corn because I'm like, man, that's where I'm jumping all those deer. Now, was that deer bedded in the beans because I pushed him away from that corn? I'll never know that. Had he been bedded in those beans all year, and you just couldn't simply see him in the evening? I mean, the beans out in Nebraska are the tallest beans I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen anything like it. And even when I, end up shooting this deer and we're dragging him out that night along those beans, like, I remember the other guys are like, these are up to your neck. These are ridiculously how tall they are. Well, I see this deer staying up out of the beans, and all I can do is see the tops of his tines coming through the beans. So that gives you a perspective of how tall those things were. And this deer works right down into my setup that night. And I end up shooting him at exactly 30 yards. I didn't see him go down. If there was no foliage or no undergrowth on, I definitely would have seen him fall. But then then I was at the situation. I was like, okay, I knew it. I knew this deer was dead. I mean, a really good shot on this animal. But that, I thought, I didn't know exactly where the other guys in this Airbnb they were hunting. I just knew I was an hour and a half from the house at least. And so I sent out a text. I'm like, I killed one, guys, and they're like, you need help? And I was like, no. I was like, as colorblind as I am, I said, this deer's dead right here. He's gonna be dead right here. but what was so cool is that they were like, do you want us to come up there? And I said, no, you're fine. And I can't remember. I feel like it. I feel like Matt Lear. He says, I'm on my way. Drop a pin. I was like, dude, I'm a long ways away. You don't have to do that. And they're like, no. Then they all were like, we're on our way. So I said, you know what? I won't even touch this track job this night. I'll wait for all you guys. So by the time they get there, it's another like 2 hours. And this is late at, you got to think sunsets is really late September 1. So we're not going to like 10 o'clock at night before we're even headed back in there. Short track job. And, you brought up the point about not knowing like everything about these animals. And when we recovered him, his head like was kind of stuck under him. And the only thing I knew I was going to get myself into is when I seen him coming across those beans, I could tell he had a bunch of like velvet, and I wasn't too sure what else, but he had just a bunch of shit hanging from his antlers, like fresh out of velvet, like that, within hours. And I could not wait to pick him up and see what he was. I thought for sure, I told all the guys, I was like, he looks like a 120 style 8-point. Like and guess what? It definitely wasn't even an 8-point. He's got like 10 or 11 countable points, and he had all this stuff hanging off, and it was like, very cool because I had no idea what kind of deer that was. But looking back at, maybe why that hunt was successful is, yeah, I did some light scouting, nothing too heavy. The reading the tracks thing that ultimately led me to like the second point of interest that connected kind of the very first point that I found scouting was, even though I was in an unfamiliar place, I was still kind of taking what I do at home still. I just didn't know. I don't know what animals are there. I know it's a good part of the country, so I don't like that's half the battle when you're traveling, is just putting yourself in an area of the country that's probably a little bit better than wherever someone comes from. Well, and then also just the fact of like not trying to boil the ocean. Like, this is early season. I don't need to. These are unpressured deer at this point. Like, this isn't some Michigan swamp. Like, they actually have terrain out there that I can try to use. And now looking back at it, if I shared where I killed this deer train wise, everyone would say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. That spot looks killer. And I think it could be killer next year too, because let's just say those two crop fields are reversed. Like, you're still got a good corn and bean rotation out there. So I that's how Nebraska went. I probably left out some good details, but just going out there, I never was really, I didn't feel overwhelmed at all. The only part that I felt like a little bit, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but just knowing that I was going to be gone, like that kind of distance away from the Airbnb, that I had packed accordingly, that when I left in the morning, because I was, I wanted a glass in the mornings. When I left at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning to go glass, I knew I wasn't coming back until well after dark. So my days were going to be spent up, way up in this area of Nebraska. So I knew I had to have a cooler, I had to have the right amount of food, I had to have all my gear ready to go. Like, I kind of was living out of my truck, but only for pretty much the daytime.
Yeah, and it's just wild because when I was hearing that, I had the same thing. Like, in my truck, I had a cot in the back because I knew, like, at one point I was like 90 minutes away. So it was like, if this is good and I'm going to come back here in the morning, like, I might just sleep in the truck right here. And, I was exact same thing because, like, both sets of guys, right? So the guys I was out there with, and then I don't know Brett, I just know him a little bit through social media, but Matt is an amazing person. So,
Yep.
So you wouldn't have had any issue, with those guys, but you really don't know, like, until you get out there, how it's going to play out, but one thing you did leave out, and I just wanted to throw in there just for your, because it comes into play, I think, a little bit when you get to Illinois, is you were going and doing you'd put out some trail cameras
Mhm.
when you were in Nebraska, but not when you were in Illinois. And did you think it how much did that play a factor in it? Like your thought process out of state, like as you're, kind of moving your way through these hunts, right?
Yeah. So it's so interesting, the whole out of state trail camera thing, because I've talked to a lot of people about it. And I could probably sit here and give you an argument why they're good for it and why they're also bad for it. So going out there, I I wanted to take 3 cameras is what I wanted to do, because like I said, I kind of had A, B, and C spots kind of planned out. And I didn't want to sit and, because I know, like, if I get into scouting too much, I can take just spot B and find 3 good areas why I should deploy all 3 cameras on spot B. So I kind of just told myself one for each spot that I'm looking at. And I get out there and I get the first camera deployed and no service. So boom, okay. This is where I took 2 cell cams and 1 SD card camera. Well, okay, this is where the SD card camera's got to go. Is I got to put it right here. Well, go to spot B. Somewhere along the lines, I busted the antenna on that camera, and now guess what? Spot B technically has a cell camera, but it has no antenna and the wires broke. So now spot B also has an SD card camera at it. And this is all on night 1. And by the time it got dark on night 1, I had 2 cameras deployed and I had 1 sitting in the truck. And I was like, I'm not even gonna put that freaking camera out. I'm not. Like, it's just gonna sit in the truck the rest of the time. And what was funny is, so that the very first camera I put out was very close to where I end up killing that buck. But it was an SD card camera. So I never even, like, that camera didn't come out of there until the day after I killed, because like once I killed that night, like I didn't think about like, oh, I should grab this camera. Like I wanted to inspect the arrow. I need to get back up to the truck. I need to get the deer cart ready. So in hindsight, happened to go all the way back up there, hour and a half the next day, one way, get the cameras, hour and a half back, 3, that's a 4-hour round trip. And those cameras did me absolutely nothing up there. Like the buck I killed, they were out for what, 48 hours. He wasn't on those cameras. You know what I mean? Whereas like looking back, it was like when I left there, I thought, yeah, I'm probably not going to play the trail camera game on out of state trips again, unless it's, like when I go out to Iowa, I do like a special scouting trip out there, because it's just fun, right? It's something totally different. Only get to do it so many years. But it was like, I knew I had my Illinois trip coming up late in November. It was like, I'm not taking trail cameras. Like I'm not going to do it. But guess what? Like that little devil on my shoulder ended up showing back up, and I still packed. Guess how many I packed? 3 cameras still found their way in the back of the truck to Illinois. You know what I mean? But once I got there and you start scouting, it's like, holy shit, man. Like you start thinking about, if I have to go back in there and get these cameras, like it's a time barrier, and especially not only when you're hunting, but say when it's time to, like, hey, I could have been processing that deer instead of like having to spend 4 hours going to get cameras. I could have been home possibly 4 hours earlier, where it's very interesting, because I know this conversation is eventually going to get there where I don't know even what to think moving forward. Like I loved like the way these last 2 years, these 3 out of state trips have played out the way they have. Like I'm falling in love with that. But I also love what I do at home also. But they're so different in styles. There's a little like correlation, like I talked about, like the tracks. It doesn't matter if I'm at home or Nebraska or Illinois or Kansas, wherever. Like the tracks, I can play that game anywhere. But when it comes to cameras, Adam, it's gonna be like I said, maybe outside of like going to Iowa, and because I can deploy them, then come back later in the year. Outside of that, I I think the next time I'll really challenge myself to not even put them in the damn tote next time.
Well, and I think that why I wanted to have this conversation and why it's like super fun for me is, again, like maybe it's just because I'm lazy, but I think like in reality, I'm, there's guys that are just bad rut hunters, like the bed hunting guys, the guys that put in all the work. They're like, the rut screws up everything because there's more guys in the woods. These deer are off their pattern. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But for me, that's like, you just look at, okay, where are the deer supposed to be? They're supposed to be downwind of bedding. They're supposed to be over here. And you get like kind of that, you get in that rhythm of, okay, this looks like bedding. Like this is where the wind is today. This is where I'm going to be. And I think that that's why I like the out of state hunting. And I've been saying it for the last, 2 years, is that like, I need to start hunting in the state like I hunt out of state, which is just like go to new properties instead of going back where I know, just burn them until I find the sign that I'm looking for, set up there, and then kind of like you did, like we'll get into the Illinois hunt, but then just adjust, let the deer tell you what they're doing, and then make those moves, because that to me is like where, when these guys, when I guess it's taken me this long to realize like that's what it means when everybody says it's situational. You know what I mean? Like, yes, in this situation, but in reality, it's like you have to be there to see what the deer are doing to tell you what to do. And if you're just hanging back waiting because you have all this time and you have all of this old intel, well, out of state, or if you're on a new property, like you don't have that. So you have to like read what's in front of you. And so for you to have that very huge dichotomy of like, this is the way I hunt at home, but now I have to like turn and burn all this stuff. And what I also thought was funny, I wrote it down when you were saying it, just because I know that this happened, but I killed, when we were talking about Nebraska and Kansas, like I killed my deer. The only reason that I was on the property that I was on was because the property I was on the night before, great spot, could kill a deer there. We had an east wind and I couldn't hunt that on an east wind. So I had to go and switch. And I know you had said like everything you had set up wasn't really for an east wind. And then, so now you got to pivot. So I thought that was, just the correlation is wild.
Yeah. Well, and it's because ever since this season has come to an end, like I always try to look back, and I look back at some of this success that I'm finding out of state, and then what I do at home, and, the topic of like trail cameras come up, and I think about like, well, what do I use trail cameras at home for? And it's like, where I live, say if I have 12 permission properties, I can't promise you there's a good buck on all of them. And a lot of times that's what that camera is for, is trying to figure out, okay, what one has a buck that I would maybe like to shoot? What one maybe has 2 or 3? Who knows? When I go out of state like this, and I'm not saying you have to go out of state just for, bigger deer and better deer hunting. Like there's all kinds of experiences to be had out there. But these places I'm going out of state, I'm going there because I know that it's probably better deer hunting than what I come from in Michigan. And so I'm like, well, in Michigan, I'm using the cameras to make sure there's a deer I want to shoot there. Where it's like when I went to the, area in Illinois or Kansas or Nebraska, it's like, I know there's deer there I want to shoot. I just need to hunt. You know what I mean? Where it's, I don't know, and what's wild too about this entire year, Adam, is this is the first year ever since I started running trail cameras in 2011. I didn't even put them all out, not even here at home. It was more or less like I probably put out only 60% of my cameras this year. It was just like they're in good spots. If a big deer's on that property, I know that he'll use, say, this scrape with a trail camera on it, and I'll be able to identify that there's a good buck using this piece of ground that I'm hunting. Where, I just going out of state, look back and it's like, man, DJ, you're traveling these places in this country because there's good deer there. You just got to hunt, and then talking about the east wind like that, that spot in Nebraska, that's a wild thing about e-scouting is you sit in e-scout and you're thinking September 1, September 1, September 1. It's going to be south wind, southwest, maybe southwest again, maybe a west, maybe one day. Then when you get there and you start going, you start looking at that 14-day forecast and it turns to 10 days and it turns to 7 and 5. And you're like, holy shit, I'm going to have some kind of easterly winds the entire time. But it's like some of these spots, oh man, it's like I look back at the spot in Nebraska and I thought, originally why I ended up hunting it that first night was not only just because of what the track reading that was happening there, but I thought, dude, if this wind switches at any time, maybe I won't be able to go in there and hunt like that. May I have to try it on the east wind. But that, during that story I told you, once I got set up in that tree and the way it looked, there's spots where it's like when I sometimes like I just have to see things. I'm such a visual learner. Like I actually believe that my e-scouting is my weakest part of hunting, in my opinion. Like that's the one thing I try to work on a lot. But I think that partially because I've been a flatlander my whole life, so when I look at stuff in the Midwest, it's very, very different. So once I start seeing it, I can start applying that to different areas. Same as like when I went to Kansas in 23. Now Kansas and Nebraska, they're different, but there's terrain features I seen in Kansas in person that I know what they look like on a map. I use that in Nebraska too, so I'm like, I know what that's gonna look pretty close to that. The big thing you never know is like how thick something's gonna be. You have a good idea, but you never know until you show up. Well, when I got up in that tree that night, it looked so good. I felt so good about the spot that I was willing to like try to figure out a way how to hunt it when that wind turned out of the west in 2 or 3 days, because I thought it just looked that good. And I look at a lot of these spots that I've found success in, and I'm like, I think you could hunt them on multiple different winds if your access is good, but like now knowing, say if you told me, Adam, you said, DJ, that buck that you're hunting in Nebraska, he's bedded into the beans. He's bedding in the beans every day. I would say, dude, we can hunt this spot on almost any given wind. We just got to figure out how we can access it. With how tall they were, that deer never stood a chance at seeing me. Never at all, And what was wild about that is like, you talk about, things being so much different from home. That's the first deer I've ever shot off a field edge, ever. Because he was actually coming, that deer is bedded out in those beans. He was working down through the beans to the field edge and was dropping down into this drainage. And I think he was going to cut and go up to that cornfield. It was what he's trying to do, but I was sitting there waiting for him.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, if so, I think it's Zach Fehrenbach's like, they're just, they're not that smart. We give them so much credit. They're wily. But when you can look at these terrain features, and if you take kind of like geography out of it, and you can say that a fence row is the same as a ditch, is the same as a swamp edge, is the same as a field edge, and you just look at them as roads and highways and stuff like that, there's a lot of correlation there. And the wind, the wind, you just have to make sure, like you said, like you get in there well enough, because the deer that I killed in Tennessee this year was on the absolute wrong wind, but it was the last day for that section. And we knew that there were bucks in there, and it was like, we're going to leave bucks to go find them because this wind is wrong, or we're just going to say, we're going to hunt this morning, see what happens. And then tonight we'll make a plan. And we ended up killing that day. And it was just simply, the wind, the deer don't always move with the wind to their nose. That, they don't always bed with the, these are things that you think, but when you get into the rut, when you get into like these unpressured deer, they do a lot of different stuff because they haven't been messed with, or they have no reason to. And so that's what's interesting again for you, because I think of you more of like a swamp guy. And so now you go to Kansas and you're able to be successful, and then you go to Nebraska, and where it's really dry and you're dealing with all this other stuff, and then you go to Illinois, and admittedly you say, well, I'm not really a hill country guy, this is the first time. You're going to go in there, and then you're able to be successful on geez, an absolutely incredible deer. And again, it's back to that whole like surprise thing. So I want to talk about that from like the surprise aspect of it, because like I say, you're always chasing, the wide 7 or berry or whatever. And now these deer show up and like, what does that do for you? Because it's got to feel similar to when berry shows up or when you realize it's the wide 7, as far as like, holy shit, that's a monster. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's well, before we hit on that, I do want to circle back to something you brought up. You talked about like the, being such a swamp guy. Is there's a lot, like looking back now, I can see like correlations of, when it comes to swamps, if you look at swamps, all swamps have edges, right? And I'm a super big believer in just whitetails being edge animals, where it's like, you take a swamp, eventually that swamp may turn north and west, or north and south, to east and west. Well, we have two edges. We have multiple things going on there. Where like, even I look back at Nebraska, I look at Kansas, I look at, this Illinois buck that's coming up. It's like there's still edges in those stories, and maybe that's what I'm really looking at. Is I'm just seeing multiple edges. I'm seeing multiple things come down together, where it's like, if I took that Nebraska map, and I showed the map and took out the row crop fields and said, okay, these are swamps, you'd say, dude, this is a great spot to kill one, and that's where I killed them. It wasn't swamps, it was food instead. Where it's like, they're, like you said, they're not, they're just wild animals. Maybe we do give them too much credit sometimes, but I do believe they're such edge animals. But when it comes to the surprise part, it's when you going out of state, it's the unknown, and I find myself chasing that more and more and more, and even in my home state. And for example, in the postseason, so last year at this exact time, I scouted more public ground than I ever have in Michigan, just trying to chase the unknown. What's around that next corner? What could be living here that I don't know about? Okay. And I think that's a lot of what it is out of state. Early season, you're probably not going to hear one coming unless he's coming down a ditch that's got water on it. But like, say in Illinois, when those leaves start crunching, and I'm not sitting there going, okay, what buck's it going to be? I know there's two good ones here. I have no clue. I have zero clue. And when I've told the story about, like, especially that Illinois deer, and I did this with both my out of state deer this year, where it was like I had to almost pause before I could put my hands on them, because I didn't know what I was going to pick up. I had a good idea, right? Where I'm bow hunting, so they're inside bow range. I got a pretty good look at them, but I don't freaking know. But I can tell you this: that feeling of surprise is already playing a factor in my 2025 season. And this is why I just picked up a brand new permission piece of property last week, and I've been working on this piece for years. Finally got permission on it. Now, it's still, beginning to middle of January, and I could go put out cameras and probably go figure out what deer are still around, but I don't want to. I'll probably put a camera out there come late August next year, because I want that surprise for next year. Like, it's like I'm chasing the unknown. Like, and this is small. This place it's less than 50 acres, but it's like, it's the unknown now. Like, these are going to be totally different deer I haven't seen before. So that surprise is really starting to weigh very heavily on me now. And I think, and even if like these out of state trips, even if I didn't punch a tag, just going out there and the unknown, what could walk by, is I love that.
So being there's a couple things I want to ask you about, but one is so in your mind, you say that you're weak in e-scouting, right? Mm-hmm. If guys maybe who aren't that successful in Michigan, and they say, okay, well, I'm going to go somewhere where I know there's deer that I want to kill, and maybe they have different different goals or whatever. Maybe they want to just kill a 2-year-old buck, or they just want to kill a racked buck, and it should be easier because it's out of state. And you're not you're saying like you're kind of weak on e-scouting. What would you say is like one of the bigger factors in success out of state, even if you don't know what you're looking at on the map exactly?
Yeah, I would say is seeing is believing. And just the more times you can get your eyes on something. I do this a lot. I mean, I do this a lot. If you were to look at my camera roll on my phone, even in state, but especially out of state, showing up 2 days before Nebraska opened up, I may get into an area and I'm like, okay, I really like the looks of this. It looks good. I caught a big track or something, or there's some old historical rubs. I will turn my cell phone on and video that whole area. And then I'll immediately jump on whatever, mapping app that I'm using at that time, maybe even multiple of them, click on where I'm at and take screenshots of each one of those. Okay. Because there's going to be downtime during the off season. And I'll go back and look at those videos, and then I can swipe to the left, look at a screenshot, swipe to the left, look at another screenshot, and start like, I'm kind of picturing what these will look like, because I know I'm going to go somewhere else in the country that I may find something that may be very similar to that, or it will look the same, but instead of like 600-foot elevation, maybe next time it's 1,100-foot elevation, but it still kind of looks the same, but it may be drastically bigger in size. So I think for a guy that, say, you're just starting to go out there, do some e-scouting. Don't boil the ocean. Seriously, like just pick a few spots that kind of stand out to you on the map and go look at them. Just simply go look at them once you get there in person to see. Like, okay, maybe it doesn't look like this. Oh, this looks exactly like I thought it would. And I think what helped the learning curve on with like I say, some new people e-scouting is the 3D imagery, where you can like toggle how exaggerated it is, or it's like that can help the learning curve a lot, but it still don't tell you how thick it is. It doesn't tell you what kind of, it will help you, there's some layers that give you an idea of what vegetation's in there or tree species, but like once you get there, like that's really the key. But for me, man, it's just seeing it. I look back at, my last 3 out of state trips, even going back all the 4 trips to Iowa in 2020, it's like, e-scouting, but then seeing it in person, or it's like, okay, yep, that's it. Like that looks the spot, and not every time it even pans out. Hell, I'm happy if 1 out of like 3 or 4 times that I get into a spot and it's like, okay, yep, this waypoint was really good.
So do you do that also like after a kill? Like, because I feel like that would almost be more important to especially on a new spot where it's like the first time, and then you're saying, okay, this is what happened.
Yeah. So after I kill, and I did this on all 3 states that we were talking about, I will start looking at every piece of public land, or even inside the public land I was already hunting, and I will try to mimic that exact same spot. Maybe for a different wind, because maybe I go back again. Maybe I'm back in Nebraska and I need that. But now we have, say, I don't know, for an example, north wind instead of in southeast wind. Where could I find something that's very similar? Like I'm copying, pasting what that looks like to see if I can't find it somewhere else, to have, have more options. Because, I found success in those kind of terrain features. Now let's just see if we can find more of them.
And then one of the other things, because you went, you were a solo trip out to Nebraska, and then you drove separate vehicles when you went to Illinois. And again, I know this from heading to Kansas by myself. That's a lot of time in the truck to kind of like be with your own thoughts. And I'm more of a hunting camp or hunt with a buddy type guy. And I think, a lot of your hunts kind of like revolve around your family. So that's the first ones you're calling. They're the ones that are coming to help you track when you're at home. But like, I don't know how far it was to Nebraska, but it had to be 10 hours or something. Like, what are you thinking in your head for that, because there's the trepidation, like, did I do enough preparation? Do I have all my stuff? Like, how is this going to go? Like, that's not something that you really get in Michigan on a regular, in your home state on a normal thing. So, like, what was going through your mind and that sort of thing after just being in Kansas with a whole group of guys,
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you bring that up because I think back, I went to Iowa. It was me and my real good buddy. I went to Kansas. That's 11 guys. I go out to Nebraska, went out there by myself, but shared an Airbnb with some guys. And even Illinois, I drove out there by myself, but then shared camp with some guys where, growing up, you and I have talked about this on your podcast, I basically hunted with my grandpa and my uncle. That was pretty much it. But, over the last kind of 10 to 12 years, hunting is very much of a solo thing for me. It always has been. I like the camp aspect too. I just never grew up with that in Michigan. Still don't. Like I didn't grow up going to a hunting camp on November 15th or anything like that. Never really went up northern Michigan hunting. So solo hunting is no, like, it's no big surprise for me. When it comes to driving and thinking, that's where we all do our thinking, right? Especially when you're solo. What I find myself doing though is as we sit here on a podcast today, if on my hunting trips when I'm going out by myself, I don't really even listen to podcasts. I just turn on some music and let it randomly play. And I just think about, I don't think about like, I never think about if I'm am I gonna fill a tag? Am I not gonna fill a tag? It's more or less I feel focused, but I feel loose too. Like it's more of like, what's the unknown? What are the roads gonna look like when we're there? Who am I gonna run into, or what kind of conversations am I gonna have with the locals? What can I take away when I leave, when this truck gets, pointed back home? What's my takeaway going to be? What's going to be the good, the bad, the ugly out of this trip? But I can promise you the one thing is I never think about like, oh my gosh, like I hope I fill a tag. It's never about that, because the one thing I know about like in life is, say if you got a 7-day trip planned and you're driving out there and you're all excited, you got 7 days, dude, that 7 days is going to go by quick and you will be pointed, back home, and that will be over with. And it will be, who knows, the next time you go take that same kind of trip, So I just try to soak it all in, because when it comes to like travel hunting, I've talked about this quite a bit, is like, I love the planning of it. I love the packing. I love going and getting the groceries for it. Like I love all of that. Like, cause that's all part of it. It's, we talk about like loving the process. Well, that's part of the process of travel hunting is, the packing the truck, cleaning the truck. I'm like, I don't know why I do this, but like, I always got to, about detail the inside of my vehicle before I go hunting. And every time my wife's like, you go out to Kansas, Nebraska, you come back from those states, dude, your truck is the it's like concrete dust out there. So they're pretty packed inside, but I love the, cleaning the truck, the packing in it. I love all of that. Now you brought up the aspect about, like how, when I'm in Michigan, like I've never tracked a deer in Michigan without, either my wife or my daughters, since I've been around. That part is really different. When I go out of state, it does feel like something was missing there. It's fun to come home and show them the deer because they haven't seen it, but it doesn't feel right at the same time. Like it's very odd. So a lot of times I try to FaceTime them. But what's always so wild to me during those FaceTime conversations, it's like, yeah, I'm just in the middle of nowhere. I'm so freaking far away from home, where it's like it's definitely tugs at the heart a little bit that they're not there, but it's part of travel hunting.
And so with the Illinois trip, we didn't really touch on that much. What was the timetable on that one? Because I think sometimes that, you say, well, you got a 7-day hunt or this, like, for me, I've been on hunts that are 10 days long and I've been on hunts that are 4 days long. And when you say 7 days goes by quick, man, a 4-day hunt, if you're trying to scout and not, erase property, and everybody talks about, oh, you take the first day and you drive around, you look for everybody. Like, so what was your timetable there, and like what was your thought process going into that one versus Nebraska?
Yeah, so the wild part about Nebraska, looking back at it is, I, at least on the family calendar, I had a week, right? I had like 5 days of hunting where, I wanted the 2 days of scouting where I had, my wife said, she said, well, why don't you just go out? Why are you going out early if it opens on Sunday? Why are you going out Friday? Why don't you take some more days on the tail end? Whereas I thought the scouting would be worth the 2 days of scouting would be worth more than trying to get 2 more days of hunting towards the tail end, especially with it being the opener. Because I figured every day past that opener, that clock was ticking, and it was probably going to get a little bit tougher on me. So when it comes to Illinois, Illinois, I wanted to do something during Michigan's gun season. Just wanted to go experience a state that their gun season hadn't opened yet, and that bow hunting was still happening. And I figured, there's been years in the past where, like the year before, I left for Kansas on like November 2nd, and we came back on say the 13th, and then by the time I got home it was gun season. It was pretty much over for me around here. So I thought, why not I'll spend the rut in Michigan still, and we'll go try to catch one in Illinois kind of middle of November. Now that is a time period I've never focused on killing a big deer in, especially with archery equipment. Like, that was completely new. But what I wanted to give myself, I told myself, I was going to show up. I was going to show up on the 14th. Yeah, I showed up on the 14th. It was a Thursday, because I thought I'll leave the day before Michigan's gun season opens. I show up on the 14th. I'm gonna scout all day, all the way till dark. And if we can find anything good, I'll get into the tree on the 15th. But once the 15th started, I kind of give myself a week. It was kind of a weekend to weekend kind of thing where I knew, if you had the weekend on both sides, it kind of gives you fluctuates with some time.
And how did that like play into, because you ran into a ton of pressure down there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does that do for your mindset? Because you're on a you're on a short timetable. You're on, you've already decided you're not gonna deploy any cameras. You're just gonna go check out what's going on. And now here you are, there's trucks everywhere. So what does that do to your, like, I think out of state, at least for me, and it seems to be like most of the people that I hunt with, like, as soon as you find yourself pressing, then you can just forget it. You can write it off. You should just go home. Because if you're really like, I need to kill something, or everything's going bad, like, as soon as your like mindset shifts to like anything negative, like, you've just given up,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you nailed it. I mean, mindset part of it. I mean, you talk about that. That is such a big thing, especially when you're traveling out on the road and your family. If you got wife and kids at home, and like your mind's got to be straight out there on the road. And maybe that's part of driving wherever you're going, is like you better strengthen that mind and have it right. But when it comes to, it's funny that you asked me about this pressure thing, because I had someone ask me this kind of question about 2 weeks ago over a phone call. I grew up with pressure, and still today in Michigan, I deal with pressure. I don't have a single even private piece of ground that I hunt that I have sole permission to. So showing up out of state on a piece of public land, this kind of like, yeah, there's one like, oh, hey, I wonder how many vehicles are going to be in this parking lot. That's the same thing I deal with in Michigan on private ground. I don't know when I show up to, the designated parking area that the farmer allows people to park at. I don't know. Is it just going to be me? Is it going to be 11 other trucks? I have no clue. So the pressure thing honestly, it doesn't really bother me that much, Adam. And I know it sounds crazy, because that pressure plays such a big factor, that it's that the other hunting pressure is probably what influences guys' minds the most when it comes to, saying hunting public land or even hunting private land that other people can hunt. Where over the years, I've just got to the point where it's like, I can't control what everyone does, and all I can do is keep moving. If there's guys there, keep moving. But it's what's funny is like, these times out of state or even in Michigan where I've found success, like I'm not running into guys out in the timber really, while I'm in stand, is that going to happen? Sure, it happened to me in Iowa, but it's like it doesn't. That's not real discouraging to me because I feel like that's such a small sample size of like what's actually going on out there. And as say, for instance, in Illinois, yeah, I could have been extremely discouraged that the day I killed that morning hunt had seven trucks in it. But you just got to bounce. You got to keep moving. The late Todd Prenant said, if you don't like the results you're having, just keep moving.
Now, that can you kind of go into like where you killed that buck in Illinois, or like kind of how that broke down? Because that was literally sounded like pivot, 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 and yeah, there's some things in that hunt that I want to talk about because I think that they're important both from like a hunting standpoint and then from like a like tenacity or like sticking to your goals like standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off by saying this. The one thing about say going to these TAC events and meeting people, the podcast and meeting people and social media and meeting people, I am not afraid to ask questions to other guys. Okay. And I've made it very clear. I haven't done a ton of hunting in hill country, but I also knew like this part of Illinois I went to, like, to me, it was hill country. To some guys, like, some guys say from the Appalachian range, like they probably don't think that's hill country. But so I looked back at some of the guys I knew that, had hunted hill country, and I've just kind of picked the brains about, what I was really wanting to pick the brain about is that time of November, because I'm not used to it. And some of these guys that have found a lot of success at that time, that they all had one thing to say, is they all said, they said, DJ, you're probably not going to see the number of bucks that you would see if you went the week before, but when you do see one, it very well could be a good one. And he could just kind of he very well could be out on his own, just searching for that one last doe. It's okay. And one of my buddies told me this, and this played such a huge factor of me killing Illinois. And this guy grew up in Wisconsin, and he said, when it comes to the rut in hill country, he said there's times that I'll abandon the sign and hunt terrain features. And I just, for some reason, that stuck in my mind when we had that conversation. Well, we get to Illinois. It's day one, and I'm just scouting. Right, I'm out there all by myself, scouting this big long ridge system, and I'm finding all kinds of good sign. I mean, just loaded with big sign. Like obviously something was big, isn't big in here right now, or there at least was sometime this fall. Well, I tore that whole thing apart. It stunk like buck in there. I found some old scrapes, some giant rubs, and I decided I scouted that for about a half a day, and then went on and scouted some other pieces. But even when I was scouting those other pieces, my mind was still back at this first piece. You couldn't deny the sign. But what I didn't know is when exactly that sign was laid down. That particular area had an adjacent cornfield, probably, I don't know, 300 yards, 350 yards away from this ridge. And I couldn't help but think, was that sign laid before the corn was down, or has it been laid since then? There wasn't a lot of fresh shavings on top of the leaves from these rubs. The scrapes were still there, but they weren't fresh, but there's no leaves in them. So they're at least after all the leaf fall, but they had like a glazed over look. I didn't love them, but they were there. There was a lot of them. Well, I threw a sit at that morning one, and seen a few does, and I want to get down and do more scouting during the day, November 15th. And I'm scouting away, scouting away, scouting away. And there gets to be a point during that day I thought to myself, I said, DJ, you've scouted this so much, it's probably blown up for tonight. You're gonna have to go jump somewhere else. So I decided to go somewhere else that night, kind of in what I did. We talk about trying to copy and paste kind of what you're seeing. Well, I get out on the map. I on day one, I seen all this sign that ran along this ridge system that came off a big crop field system. I said, okay, where could I maybe mimic that? Well, I found something, but it was a little bit smaller scale to it. I try to go hunt it. I go hunt it the evening of November 15th. I get set up, and my thought was is if it feels good, I'll hunt it the next morning. I'll leave all, my platform and my ropes. I'll leave all that in the tree. Well, that night I hunted it, got skunked, didn't feel right, packed it all up, back to the truck, back to the Airbnb for the night. And so the next morning I had two options. I could either I could go and blind somewhere at gray light, which I've never done, or I could go right back to that ridge system that I scouted on day one. And I don't know. I look back at this and it's like, you know, if you text me and says, "Hey, what would you do right now?" I'd say, "Well, dude, you gotta go back to that big ridge system. You found the sign. You didn't hunt it last night, Adam. You should probably go try that in the morning." For some reason, that's not what I did. And I don't know if it was like, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but going into this trip, it had already been a hell of a fall. It kind of felt like I was playing with house money. Like when I knew that when I drove home from Illinois, I didn't want to have any regrets. Like leave it, try if you want to try something, learn something, go ahead and do that. So I told the guys in camp, I says, what? I've never walked in anywhere at gray light to try to hunt in the morning like that. That's what I'm going to do in the morning. And so that's that's exactly what I did. And for some reason, I had left the truck that morning when it was still dark out. And so when I say I wanted to walk in at gray light, I used the darkness to get to a certain point, then kind of waited till gray light. So like I walked quite a ways in the dark. Then once it got gray light, got set up. I actually really liked that spot, the way it looked until my buddy drove by, that was down there hunting with me. He drove by, Aaron, and he says, "Dude, there's 7 trucks in the same parking lot you're in." I was like, "No shit." But what was interesting is when I pulled in that parking lot that morning, there was one other truck there, but that wasn't, I mean, that wasn't too discouraging to me. So that meant that 5 other trucks pulled in, but none of them, I'd never seen any of them in where I was hunting. And I could see a pretty good clip in there. All the foliage is off. None of them were in there. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But either way, I sat till midday that day. And that's kind of when the story really turns is I was doing some driving after I got back to the truck, and I was driving around some other pieces, and I come over this bridge, Adam, and I looked down off this bridge, and I thought, man, that looks sweet. That looks like a place you'd kill an Illinois river buck right there, right on that bottom. I mean, that was the one thing we talked about earlier in this podcast about e-scouting is you just don't know how thick things are going to be. That was the one thing that was really surprising for me in Illinois is I could read the terrain. I didn't know exactly how big it was going to look in person, but I wasn't ready for how thick the tops were. Like these ridge tops were really thick. And when I looked at that bottom, I thought in my mind, I was like, dude, I could hunt that. I could hunt that. Like that looks huntable to me. But I got caught daydreaming on the bridge there because the next thing I know is someone's honking at me. So what the hell? And I said, "Oh shit, someone's behind me." So I said, "Oh, I got to pull over." So I pull over to the side of the road, and I literally in my head, this is exactly what I was doing, what we talked about earlier. I was going to bring up the map. I was going to look at exactly what I was sitting on right now and try to mimic that on public land somewhere. That's exactly what I was trying to do. Let's see how far this river runs. Does this river ever touch a piece of public land by chance? Well, when I open up the map, it's all shaded public. I'm like, oh shit. And I was like, I could hunt this. And I'm looking down off that edge. And I was like, man, do I hunt right here? Like, I know it's close to the road, but I'm like, man, it looks right. You know, we talk about it like it has to look the part for me. Like I'm such a visual person. Yes. So, well, let me go find a parking lot and get kind of like get my bearings straight here. I got to figure out what way's north and south. And so I pull in this parking lot and I get the map back out. I'm looking at it and I'm running along this big river bottom, and I see these two ridges drop down. That the ridges run north and south, and the river runs east and west, for example. Well, I could access it, and we had a southeast wind that day, and I said, well, if I access it from the north, I don't have to touch those two ridges. And the reason that the two ridges caught my attention is the two ridges dropped down to this river bottom, and it made both of them were natural funnels. One was 26 yards, and the other one was about 40 yards. And that's when my buddy's that's when my buddy popped up in my mind. Him saying, sometimes during the rut in hill country, I will hunt terrain over I hunt sign. It's okay. I'm thinking about that, and I was like, dude, that's it. Like that's a natural. Those are two beautiful natural funnels right there. Like that's like this isn't a spot I had picked out on a map or anything. It just happened to be I drove by this bridge and it just caught my attention. So I thought, well, if I cross that river or walk down the river bank or figure something out, I could pop right up this bank and be right in that smaller funnel. Like I should choose the smaller of the two funnels because that's going to be the tighter window. The smaller of the two funnels, the smaller funnel was to the east of the bigger funnel was to the west. Okay. And we went back to the Airbnb. I had like I don't know, 45 minutes to just get a bite to eat. And I told Aaron, I said, I'm going right back in that funnel. And not right back in it, but I'm going to that funnel. I was showing him the funnel on the map, and he's like, okay. And I had a buddy back home, and he says, you got a plan for tonight? I said, yep, I'm hunting here. And there's an obstacle on that piece of public ground that he was like, man, I don't know about that. And I said, well, we're going to find out. I don't want to give too much away on the podcast here about it, but so I drop in there. I luckily I took my knee boots, because that's one thing. These trips leaving Michigan, it's kind of nice to get to leave the knee boots behind, but I always pack them just in case. And I said, I'm going to put these knee boots on because I may need them in that river. And thank God I had them because it took every bit of that knee boot to get across that river. Well, I jump up this river bank, and right off the river bank, I'm talking 5 yards off the bank. Here's a tree. Boom, I can hunt it. So to paint a visual picture or an audio picture is I am facing southwest in this tree, and we have a southeast wind. Okay. And I'm expecting either east to west travel or west to east travel through here. Either way, if they come through there, they're coming through this 26-yard funnel I'm in. And I'm 5 yards off that bank. That means my farthest shot's about 19 yards. Okay. Top pin. Well, the one big thing going in this trip, I told you, is I didn't want to leave anything on the table. And not ever hunting country like this is over the years, I've kind of told myself if I'm in an unfamiliar place, if you see deer do something, like let them tell you how they traverse this ground. Go move, no matter what time it is. Like, especially if you see multiple deer do it. Well, about an hour into this hunt on the evening of November 16th, I can hear grunting, and I turn the cameras on, I grab the bow, and they're grunting, and I'm like, man, but it's kind of windy and can't see them, and and then I never see them, and I put the bow back up, turn the cameras off, and it wasn't a minute later, boom, they're grunting again. I'm like, what the hell? Like I should be able to see them. These grunts are coming from the west, and I should be able to see them. All the foliage is off, but I will say, when I looked west towards that bigger funnel, it did get thicker in there. Like it was more grassier. Like the understory was thicker down there than than where I was at. And all of a sudden, here comes a small 6 point. Then here comes about a Pope and Young 120, 125, 8 point, really extremely white rack. And here they come, and I'm thinking they go right through the first funnel. They're going to come right down through this one. And I was like, this is day number 2, and I'm looking at that 8 point with that white rack. And I'm like, you know what? He comes through this. It's been such an awesome season. I'm going to let it rip. He's going to die. Well, right as they're making their way towards me, they probably get 50 yards away. They're in that bigger funnel. All of a sudden, they cut up the ridge and they side hill the ridge that I'm kind of facing. They cut right up side hilling it. I was like, what in the hell? Like, I thought the Bucks would come through this whole bottom, a southeast wind. Those ones were working west to east, and they're basically scent checking anything that could be bedded up on those points on those ridges. And I thought, well, maybe there's a doe up there. I mean, they both, like, when they were walking through that river bottom, and as soon as they got to that base of that ridge, they trotted up there. Now, I don't know if it was just their way of getting up that ridge like that or what, but I was just kind of surprised. But that was my moment. That was what I was waiting for. That's $2. Uh, they showed me a way that they were going to traverse that ground, and so I packed all my stuff up, and I made my way down to that bigger funnel. So this funnel was to the west. It was 54 yards from the tree I had first picked to the second tree I picked that I hung my setup in. And I had about, I don't know, it had to be 45 minutes of light left by the time I got fully set up. And during that time, of course, like, I can remember thinking this is during that time that when, the sun was setting and the wind was dying down, I was like, dude, it's been breezy all day. And now when I'm trying to set this tree up, of course it's getting really quiet, but I thought in my mind, I said, this is for tomorrow anyways. This is what, I'm going to set this whole tree up, be ready to slip back in here in the morning and hunt. And I got set up is only about 2.5 sticks high, probably 10 foot, 9, 10 foot at best, right in the crotch of this tree. And I remember thinking, I said, well, there's 45 minutes left. And I said, I'm not getting this freaking camera out today. I already put it out, then I packed it back up. And I said, camera's going to stay in the pack. But I said, I should at least get the camera arm around the tree for tomorrow morning. And as I'm putting the camera arm on the tree, I'm kind of looking around, and I get that thought in my head, like I did in Nebraska, that I may sit here as long as the wind's right. I may sit here for the rest of the time. Like this, until the wind switches out of the north, I think I can do it with because there's that river right there, and I'm right on this bank. So I think I could even do it with the west and east, a southeast, a southwest, a straight south. I'm running all these winds through my head that I can hunt this with because it looks the part now. Like, I felt good. And I thought, you know what, DJ, just in case you see something special here in Illinois, get that freaking camera out so you can take it home. You can show your wife and daughters. Just get the camera out. Like, don't shortcut yourself. I put the camera out, and Adam, 16 minutes later, after I get that camera out, I look dead west. And right on this riverbank, I see this body of this deer. And its neck and its head are completely blocked by a tree. But when I see the body, I knew we were dealing with probably what we came to Illinois for. But when I lock eyes on him, like, he's inside, he's 25 yards, probably 26, 24, probably right around that window there. And this time, like, he's close enough for, like, I don't grab the camera first this time. This time the bow comes off the hanger first, and he's still standing there. So I said, okay, I got time to flip the camera screen open and try to get the GoPro running. And he's kind of standing there. So I get the camera completely pointed at him, and he hasn't moved yet. Like, he's just standing there. And in my mind, I'm looking down at there's 2 trails, and they come to a wide, damn near at the base of my tree. But it's about the only huntable tree that was in that bigger funnel. And I knew, I was like, this son of a bitch is going to come right to the base of my tree. I'm like, he's going to know I'm right here. and he steps onto that trail off that riverbank edge, and he's coming straight to me. And he gets to about 9 yards, and he kind of, he puts his neck low and he kind of tips his head up like this, and he's looking at me. I'm like, oh shit, he's got me. And you got to think he's working west to east, and he's got a southeast wind. So like, and I'm sure a little bit in his mind, like this was the perfect, like in my mind, like the way he was working that river bottom system with those ridges, it was the first true, like he was working the downwind side of all those like he was marching for one last doe. And in my mind, I'm like, just please, my wind's got to be blowing just off him enough back to that river. And he knows I'm there, and he cuts off the trail that he was walking on. He takes a hard right off of it, and now he's headed straight south, and he's headed right to that base of that freaking ridge. And I'd already ranged it, and he was hard quartering away, and I leaned way out. It's like my left foot was out on a tree branch, my right foot was on the edge of my platform, and he's walking straight away from me. But all of this is well inside bow range. It's just where he's at to where I'm at, like things are not lining up. I'm looking ahead, and there's one window, and it's 35 yards, right damn near to the base of that ridge. Because remember, like that thing's 40 yards, that funnel's 40 yards. I'm probably 5 yards off that riverbank, or like this. So we got 35 yards to play with here. And as I was watching him walk away at him, I thought for sure, I was like, I'm not killing this deer. Like I'll kill him another day. But he's getting ready to hit this window, and I decide, you know what? Let's come to full draw and see what happens. I come to full draw, and I know I'm going to have to stop him. I'm going to have to stop him hard, because I'm trying to stop this animal to the point when I stop him, I don't want to scare him, but I want him to think, what the hell was that? And kind of like turn and look, how they like turn and look back at you. And I stop him really hard, and that's exactly what he does. He locks it up, and he turns and looks back directly at my tree. And I'm sure he had me pretty much pinpointed already, because he already knew something was off at 9 yards. Couldn't get him killed at 9 yards. So now he's at 35, and he turns. And I try to put it damn near on that last rib. So I shoot him on his left side, and I hit him a little left. Okay, so I'm shooting him for that last rib, and I shoot him a little left. This arrow ends up hitting him directly behind the shoulder, basically like those last two ribs, between the last two ribs and his shoulder. So if he was broadside, perfect shot. But for quartering away, I was a little far forward, but I was still behind that shoulder. Well, that arrow ended up burying all the way up into his chest, and we end up blood trailing him for almost 900 yards. 900 yards. And he carried the arrow the entire way with him. And basically what happened is it was a one long hit and got up basically into his chest cavity. And I actually think that arrow inside of him probably made him bleed even more, because there was a point during the blood trail that you could tell he was starting to bleed out of his mouth, and basically just bled to death. Like I've never blood trailed a one lung deer and been able to recover him like that. But, looking back at that hunt right there, is there sign in there? Probably, but I have no clue. Like I truly dropped in there just by a train feature. And that's we don't get that a lot in Michigan. Like when we look at a map, we're like, oh yeah, that's a swamp, that's a bog, that's farm field. Like we don't get that a lot. So, when my buddy said, yeah, sometimes during the rut, I abandon sign and I'll hunt terrain features. I did that, but more importantly, getting down and making that move. Can you imagine? Dude, I would have been so upset with myself if I would have stayed in that tree, because I know what that buck would have done. He would have done the same damn thing those first two bucks did. And that drive home from Illinois, if I would have stayed in that tree, would have been tough. That would have, you talk about, when you're driving by yourself and have time to think, that probably would have weighed heavy on me.
I do know, because I've done that, and I did it in Ohio, and it was before the podcast, before I was the hunter that I am now.
Mm-hmm.
I watched a buck chase a doe through this, coming out of this funnel or coming out of this draw. And then I watched another one that was bigger and another one that was bigger. And I never got down and moved. And then 20 minutes later, there's a 10 point over there making a rub. And he's just, in there dinking around right where they went through. And I got him to come around. And then the doe came back through and he went right with her. And that was the last day. So but I know, like, and so now in hindsight, and that's what I was talking about, is, for that last 45 minutes, because it'd be so easy to say, well, I'm just going to get down after dark and I'm going to move over there, just in case, because I picked this tree for a reason. Maybe there'll be another buck. And then to go further, like I said, for your goals and all of that stuff, to put the camera out and get it running, because I know personally myself, and I know lots of guys who carry the camera with them, but when they get out there, it doesn't look like the right spot, or you just whatever. So you're like, I'm not going to put it out today. And then that's when you kill. And then it's like, I had all the stuff. What am I even doing carrying this stuff around? So, I think that, like I said, that tenacity, or that like stick to itiveness, I guess, just for your goals, and to say like, I want to be able to share this. Like, I think that that's what it's all about. I think sometimes we think that, the self-filming thing is, somewhat arrogant, like, oh, blah, 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 I want to show how good I am. Or you want to, you got to have content. But I think at the end of the day, as hunters, like, we see so much cool stuff out there, and you can't ever explain it as well as like showing it on video, like how cool some of this stuff is. So that's what I think is like incredible. But like, to be able to do that, and again, out of state, like, all this pressure, like, kind of dejected, you picked the wrong pinch, like, and then to have everything turn around in essentially 16 minutes. Right. I mean, I think that's great,
Yeah. It's, it's funny because I've rewatched, I get home and, well, even before I get home, that night after I shot him, then we have this long drive back. That's been like the theme these last 3 out of state hunts, is our Airbnb is always a distance away from where we're hunting. It's never right out the back door. But so we get, I have to make this long drive back to the Airbnb, and then Aaron and his cameraman meet me there. And so now we're going to put this footage in. And I was a mess, Adam, because it bothered me that I could not get this deer killed at 9 yards. Like, that was, it just, I couldn't believe that. I almost felt like one slipped through my fingers, because when I shot him, I didn't know exactly where I hit him, and I didn't shoot lighted knocks this year. Like, I haven't had the most faith in those things, so I didn't shoot him this year, and I knew I made contact with that buck. So we got back and we said, well, let's try to review the footage. And I told him, I said, you're going to get to see what this buck looks like. But I said, the shot's not on film. Like, I was like, it's not on film. But somehow I kept the whole thing together on film. No clue how. But what's funny about all of it, and I think my favorite part of all of that, the film part of it, it's not even him on camera and shooting him on camera. It's when I took that camera out of that pack and put it on there, I thought I should just go ahead and do like a talk right now. And you can see it on my face that, when I decided to make that 54-yard move, I didn't take any layers off. So I was kind, like, the hat's kind of sitting tall on my head because I'm a little sweaty from moving. But at the same time, like, I have this look on my face where I'm like, man, did I do the right thing with 45 minutes to go? But right at the end of that talk, I say, like, you can tell my confidence is building. Like, you can see my eyes. I'm like looking around. I'm like, dude, like, this looks like the spot. And right at the end, I say, there's a buck in Illinois walking around somewhere right now. Tonight's his last night. Cause I felt confident. like the longer I talked on that camera looking around, I was like, I'm gonna kill a buck in here tomorrow. I didn't know it was gonna be 16 minutes later. It's like I don't why I said that. Like you talk about like saying some weird shit. You think about driving by yourself and you get thinking like you're in a tree after a full season and like you got that camera just pointed at you and you're all by yourself, like you just say some wild things, but when I got home, like like that's the part that I wanted to show my girls first. Look at my face. I was like, I had no clue what was going to happen here in 16 minutes later, and then to have that on camera like that, it's definitely special. But you're right. It's those times when maybe you're like, I don't want to get the camera out, and especially because I'll be the first to admit, like I've only picked up a camera for the last 2 years. And I can see, like, if you look at all the footage from, say, my Nebraska trip at the very beginning of the season to Illinois, like, dude, that camera's rolling a lot more in the beginning of the season than it is at the end, where it's like, man, it's really, really tough. But for the times that it does come together and you get to like share that or send a clip to your buddy and you're like, hey, what do you think of the shot? I'm not too sure, or having that camera actually, it's so I'll tell you this part of it is I was very confident. I knew I shot that, like hit that deer. There's no doubt I hit him. So, and Aaron's able to put it in this editor and he's slowing it way down. And wildly enough, even though I don't have lighted nocks, I shot the deer. So if the tree is straight in front of me, I'm to the left of the tree when I shot him, but my camera is on the right side of the tree because that's originally where that deer was. He's right down here to my right at 9 yards. So the tree's in between the camera and myself, and you can see the deer stop. And all of a sudden, out of the top left corner of the screen, you can see this arrow come like zipping. And so, Aaron's slowing it down, frame by frame, and we're watching it. And we were convinced. I mean, the only thing that we could see change on that deer's body right before he ran was on his back by his left hip. And we were pretty convinced that's where I hit him. And honestly, that's why we decided, because I was going to let him lay overnight. Like I've never stepped foot in this area. Like I'd much rather try to go look for him in daylight, and kind of unsure about the shot. And once we kept looking back, we were all convinced that there was a tuft of hair on his back left hip that was like, that's where you shot him. I thought our thought was that you probably hit the artery, DJ. Like that was that rear artery. If you didn't, you may be a little bit too high. Like that was our concern. So that's why we said, let's go. We had to give them, it's almost 3 or 4 hours by the time we got back. And we said, we'll be able to tell by that blood if it's that rear artery. And there was a lot of blood, but he wasn't in the first 50 yards and he wasn't in the first 100. So we knew, I was like, man, it's not that rear artery. I don't, but he's bleeding a lot, and eventually we come across a big pile of blood that was full of bubbles. And we're like, okay, you obviously hit something different. Well, what it ended up being, Adam, is, like I said, that arrow, he carried that arrow that whole way. What we thought was a tuft of hair on the back, that was the fletchings as it was impacting him right behind that shoulder. And we were seeing the fletchings being quartering away like that so hard. It was hip, the fletchings were back like that by his back left hip. And, we thought for sure that's where I hit. And then when we got up to him, we're like, dude, like, I'm not going to lie. It's probably, I don't know if I ever shoot a deer that good quartering away again the rest of my life.
Well, I mean, again, like from the perspective here from the podcast, like to have you come on here and talk about this with your hunting style and, being able to translate that to public land, out of state, places that you never been, dealing with like adversity and all of this stuff. And, maybe in Nebraska, it seemed kind of easy, like where it was just a couple days, but it seems like, the Illinois one came with a couple of struggles and, really having to figure it out. And like I say, I think, again, from your perspective, because you're the, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of hours prior to the season guy to be able to go out and, convert. I think that gives guys perspective on, like, again, that you can do it too without having to go out there 100 times and scout and do all this stuff, and just be able to put it into, to kind of put all the pieces together. So like I said, that's why I wanted to have you on here. You're jet setting around, vacationing and all that stuff. So I had to kind of do it after the season, but
no, that's why, well, there had been a couple guys that reached out after the season when I had me on, and you were the first one to reach out. So I said, well, when I get back from vacation, I'll get a hold of Adam first, but, man, so basically my season was over with once I got home from Illinois, and I got home around the 21st of November. So I've had a lot of time to think about it. And you kind of brought up something right there. And that last bit of comments that you were talking about, I'm usually a guy that spends a ton of time scouting, and I love that. I honestly do. But, I have to stop and think about, like, where is this success coming from when I go out of state? Because it's the complete opposite of what I know, and it's, I've been able to, go out of state on these, short little trips, and been very fortunate enough to find some success. And it's like, the one thing I keep thinking about, it's like, I have success here in my home state too, and it may take me a bit longer, and it's not that I'm being more picky or anything, but like, why is it taking me a little bit longer? And I can't help but wonder about this is, how like in archery, how like somebody that's been shooting a long time, like they can pick up bad habits, and someone that just picks it up, like they just boom, shoot good right away. They don't know any different. Or sometimes I wonder, it's like, I can see so much value in why, if you want to go out of state hunting, it's worth a trip to go scout and learn some land. But I also can see where it's like, man, just dropping in, hunting, learning it on the fly. Like, you don't know any bad habits about that piece of ground yet. You and I, we could leave tomorrow and go out to Missouri and go scout a piece of public land and fall in love with an area because the sign looks so good, but that buck may be dead. You know what I mean? There could be so many factors over this next fall or summer that change that. And we show up there and we're kind of dead set on going to this place that, we found so much sign that we've got to hunt it, where instead, like, we should just show up there and, learn it on the fly. Like, I can see arguments for both, but that's one thing that keeps standing out in my head. It's like, am I this out of state hunting? Like, it's so much different for me, but I don't know any bad habits about these places yet, or I don't know. I don't know if it's a real thing or not. It'd be interesting to, like, try to dive deeper into that thought process.
Yeah. And like I say, that's why I say, like, that for me is what I need to do in state, is just go somewhere that I, it's hard because when you're home, you can't take a week away from your family and just say, well, I'm just going to go an hour away. Like, well, why don't you just come home? Why don't you just do this? And, when I think that's another thing too, is like, when you're out there, like during that dusk to dusk, you're just completely in the moment of hunting. And then you make your phone calls, you do your, pleasantries, like whatever you have to do for housekeeping. And then you're right back on the map. You're right back, maybe you're driving around looking for tracks, or you're, looking for deer, whatever, but you're 100% like more focused on that mission than at home when you're being pulled in a whole bunch of different directions. I think that's the only other thing.
Yeah.
But being able to but if you were able to take that week while you were home, like if you were said, okay, your family's going to Florida, but you're going to stay here instead of go to Nebraska. They're going to be down in Florida. You're going to meet them down there, but you've got 5 days to kill on a new piece of public in Michigan. I guarantee you could do it, because you'd have that same, you'd have that same ability. And I think maybe that's the only like outlier that there is.
Yeah, no, I could see it. You asked a question earlier in this podcast, and the more we've had this conversation today, the more I think maybe you could answer it better this way. So you asked me about, what do you think about when you're driving out there by yourself, and I brought up a couple of times in these conversations that going out of state like that, I do actually have a worry now that, I've told these stories. Is my worry is about, coming home and not leaving it all on the table when we're out there, like that, both those examples where it's like, man, if I don't move, what am I going to think about on the way home? So maybe that's what I think about on the, as I'm driving out there is like, hey, like your time away from family, leave it all out there. Don't come home with any, unanswered questions. Like leave it all on the table.
Yeah, I think that that's a perfect way to end this, because I think that that's, kind of the synopsis of the whole thing is you gotta be present. You gotta be out there and leave it all out there. So, I mean, yeah, I appreciate you coming on and kind of recapping this. If you want to hear these hunts in depth, it's the Method podcast from Latitude with Mr. DJ Riley. So, anything else you got? Anything else you're working on? Projects, anything like that, where they can see these? Are they going to be on Grit?
Yeah, that's my guess is they'll be on Grit. Like Adam mentioned earlier, I was fortunate enough to kill 4 bucks on there, and just bear with me, they are all self-filmed. So like these aren't they're self-filmed, man. It's hard. So all you guys out there that self-film a lot and keep the fire burning to tell your story through the entire season, I give credit to you. But yeah, they'll probably be on Grit next fall or late summer, whenever those guys do that. That's well above my pay grade. You can find stuff over at, the Method podcast. And other than that, and picked up a new permission piece here in Michigan. Looking forward to, checking that out here after the snow melts. But honestly, just kind of daydreaming about what kind of trips may be ahead for 2025.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the time, David. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam, for having me on, buddy.
These are violent criminals, so they're not going to go down easy.
ABC Tuesdays.
Let's get this done.
The Rookie is back.
We have 2 new rookies starting today.
Howdy.
Being a cop is stressful 24/7. Every year on the job is different.
And Training Day
We have a serial killer at large.
never ends.
We need an ambulance!
The Rookie. All new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.